this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. A copy of the Council privacy notice may be found on the Council website. Item 4 is declarations of members' interest. So if they want to declare those verbally, on each item, if you're in the chamber, or just put it in the chat box if you're joining online. Item 5 is the deputation, and today we have Gareth Moore and Brian McDade here from the Derry Call Centre campaign. We've had a motion previously about this issue. It's an important issue across the city, and it impacts a lot of workers across the city as well. So I've already explained to our guests that they have 10 minutes to present the slides, which everybody should have visibility of, and then we'll open it up to the floor for a question and answer session. So Gareth and Brian.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. So we're just going to basically start off with a brief outline as to what the Derry Call Centre campaign is and why it was set up. And then we'll get into some of the more specific issues impacting workers within the city. And so the Derry Call Centre campaign was established by former Derry Call Centre workers to help advocate for and support call centre workers within the city and region. They would do this through challenging perceptions of call centre work, often very negative, calling on improved pay and conditions, and providing opportunities for call centre workers to develop and improve their employability both within and without the sector. Following the recent announcement of redundancies expected at FirstSource, the Derry Call Centre campaign focused its efforts on offering free support and guidance to FirstSource workers. We have also tried on many occasions to engage directly with FirstSource without any response to date. We have provided advice and guidance on over 50 occasions to staff members who have had questions and concerns around the process that the business was failing to provide answers for. That being said, some questions do require an answer from FirstSource. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in January of 2017, we had the announcement that FirstSource had expanded the strategic partnership with Sky, securing a 10-year contract. At the time, this was reported as safeguarding the jobs within Derry within FirstSource. That was in 2017, so it should have secured the work until 2027. In the summer of this year, we had the announcement that FirstSource's contract with Sky was to be terminated and to be relocated to another employer. Next slide, please. On your screen is a list of contract services which FirstSource provided to Sky, which have been impacted by the recent redundancy announcements. Particularly relevant to us is those impacted on Derry and those in the Northwest, such as the Sky Service, Noise Sales, Sky Service, Noise Sales, and the ROI service. There was also impacts in Belfast through the ROI Loyalty and Value and ROI service. And then across the UK, home workers. So this is people working remotely. So we'll both have people impacted here in the Northwest, the wider North, and also across the UK. And also the Sky Service, Noise Sales, and the ROI service. It was obviously disappointing news, and as we began to engage with staff and look into the decisions behind this announcement, we started to find some strong connections that were built up between FirstSource and its supposed competitor, which has taken over the work, Results CX. So in the few years running up to this announcement, which again resulted in breaking the previous 10-year contract, we've seen numerous senior members of FirstSource management transition into Results CX. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through the kind of high-level positions where we've seen the connections between FirstSource and Results CX3. And this all seemed to happen just prior to the announced redundancies, which is seeing the work being transferred from FirstSource to its supposed competitor, Results CX. Next slide, please. So as we see there, we had the person who was the MD and CEO of FirstSource from 2012 to 2019, then transitioned immediately after FirstSource into Results CX. So they went from the MD and CEO of FirstSource to become the MD and CEO of Results CX in 2019 and still remain there. Secondly, we've got the Chief Revenue Officer for FirstSource between 2017 and December of 2021, so literally a few months prior to the announcement, and they had transitioned over to CX3 to become the MD for Europe for Results CX from, again, December 21 until present day. Next slide, please. Thank you. We've also seen the VP of HR for FirstSource transition over to become the Senior HR Executive for Results CX. And certainly from the comments of the workers employed there, it seems like that particular person is having a massive say in the negotiations between FirstSource and its workers. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, FirstSource workers have reached out to us with concerns about the access and the influence of the Results CX HR team is having over their redundancy negotiations with FirstSource. I have today received a statement on behalf of numerous FirstSource workers, which I'm going to read to you. And that states, both FirstSource and Results CX senior management have been ignoring a solicitor's letter sent on behalf of FirstSource staff outlining why they would not accept to go through the proposed hub transfer to Results CX. This proposal would be in the interest of all parties involved. FirstSource just last week cancelled a meeting with one political party at last minute when the party requested that site reps be present on the call. They advise that political parties try to arrange a call. They may be put in contact with a marketing VP or a PR firm who have no knowledge of the proceedings apart from reading from a script and are not involved in the consultation process. FirstSource senior management keeps saying they're not involved in the process, but FirstSource appear to be very close with Results CX when this shouldn't be the case. This could well be based on the numerous ex-FirstSource senior management figures now holding key positions within Results CX, and they may still hold influence over FirstSource senior management. Due to the way FirstSource senior management is acting, increasing numbers of employees are now opting for redundancy instead of the possibility of redeployment within the company, and are quite prepared to opt for the top transfer, even though Results CX management have advised all those impacted by redundancy that Results CX have no intention of operating a centre in the UK. Next slide, please. So in order to address the concerns raised by workers, which so far FirstSource has failed to do, we're asking on the Council to support us and the workers in trying to get answers from FirstSource. I'll simply say at this state that when these situations arise, we do within this city and region need to set up some kind of force where we can rapidly and coordinately respond to these concerns. We put together a few suggestions which we feel would help get answers from FirstSource in the immediate, but also how we could help support any worker that may be impacted in a similar situation in the future. Next slide, please. So as I stated, we would ask the Council to put questions to FirstSource, particularly in relation to the connections which have built up between FirstSource and CX in recent years. Next slide, please. So we do have a number of suggestions as to how we can plan for future activities of this kind and how we can better respond to them when they come up. Next slide, please. I'll revert back to these in a moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we move forward and make sure that we're better prepared in the future to support people, we have suggested that a task force be set up, which will include both political representation through the Council and also trade union representation coordinated through the Dairy Trades Council. So workers have told us that at the initial announcement, they did receive some political support. I know some politicians had engaged with First Source to try to understand what was happening. However, in those discussions, it seems clear that we didn't get to the nuts and bolts behind this decision, nor did we discover any of the concerns that have since been raised over the preceding months. So for us, that raises a concern that although the political representation at the time engaged with good faith, we believe that it would have been much more productive had they had the expertise behind them from the trade union movement. The Derry Call Centre campaign is an advocate for call centres. We know that through proper management and engagement of staff and decisions that impact their role, it is possible to have good working environments and people can feel safe and supported. Call centre workers, many of which were essential workers throughout the pandemic, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. For example, they should not be timed on how long their toilet breaks are. They should be allowed at least a few minutes break between calls and an opportunity to have a say on decisions that directly impact them, and also the opportunity to develop themselves professionally and personally. So I'm going to run through the suggestions, and that is effectively, we suggest that the Council sets up a working group engaged through the Derry Trades Council that will allow a task force to respond rapidly and coordinatedly to any announcements that suggest there is a risk to jobs within this city. This task force should go further and also intervene when we are made aware of any poor working conditions or pay, or where we feel, which seems to be an underlying issue across this region, that workers within this city and region are underpaid compared to their UK or Irish counterparts for doing the exact same work. Sorry. So in conclusion, I just want to state that we don't have a magic wand to make everything perfect, but we are very confident that we know how to make things better. We can't let political divisions stop us from uniting. We want every party, every member of the council to unite behind workers in Derry, not just to save jobs, but to improve pay and conditions. When concerns are raised about potential job losses or poor pay and conditions, as we've seen in examples such as McDonald's recently, we need a rapid and coordinated response, and that's what we're suggesting to council. I'll pass you over to Brian, and he'll speak a bit more generally on the call centres in Derry.
Thank you, Gareth. Just out of courtesy, Chair, how many minutes do we have left?
-1.
Okay, I'll be quick. As a fellow councillor who sits and chairs these kind of committees, I know how important time is, but I'll be very brief because Gareth has comprehensively covered what needs to be covered. But a bit from my experience, I've been involved in the trade union world for nearly 20 years, and the majority of that has been in the finance sector. And people have this perception that the finance sector is a lot better a place to work than compared to the public sector, etc. That is far from the truth. We have a lot of workers, and probably 99% of workers, facing the same challenges that all workers within Ireland and the UK face. But call centres is an area that we've been supporting for a number of years. Call centres are very common in the finance sector. Frontline workers dealing with customers day to day, week to week, month to month. And what happens is that becomes more pressurised, that place. And if we don't have a union there, the working conditions, the workers' rights disappear, working conditions become draconian. So Gareth's gone through many examples, but the one issue for me that needs to be addressed here is the pay disparity. So, for example, we recognise and represent workers within Computershare, a company that's based here in Derry. We've been trying for a number of years to get them to address the pay disparity, but each time we raise that issue, we get the same response. The cost of living is cheaper here than it is across the water. That is nonsense. We've got the stats to prove that the cost of living is affecting everyone in the same way. So what I've done, I've said to Computershare now, we tried to work with you. If you're not going to do that, we're going to go public and talk about it. That's one example, and I'm sure there's many other examples out there. But as Gareth says, what we need to do as unions, you as elected representatives of the community, is come together with us, look at ways that we can engage with employers to ensure that workers in there have the rights they deserve, have working conditions that help them flourish, have pay they deserve, and have opportunities to progress within their careers. Because at the moment, that doesn't exist in a lot of call centres. So I hope you take on board what's been said today. I'm happy to speak to you separately, happy to come and speak to you again here. But as I said, Gareth's covered everything you need, and I hope you take on board and agree to what we proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Brian. So I'm going to open it up to the floor, or if anybody would like to comment or ask a question from the members that have joined online. Anybody? Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brian and Gareth, for coming in today and doing the presentation. And I think that what you've been able to kind of discover in terms of the way the First Source management has operated is, I would describe it as corruption, and the secrecy, the trying to keep everybody at arm's length when questions have been asked, and it must be very, very frustrating for yourselves as the initiators of the Dairy Call Centre campaign, and for Aegis and for the workers themselves. So one question I would have for you is, I know that a lot of workers have been in contact with you, and if you could maybe talk a bit about that. And also, I think some workers have been in contact with solicitors trying to get some sort of establish what their rights are in terms of voluntary, in terms of the redundancy pay. And that would be very helpful as well, just to draw out the picture. I propose now that we endorse the proposal that the campaign is putting forward. I think if we can set up a working group, it can look at all the proposals that you have there in terms of a task force, and working with unions and working with groups of workers who are facing these types of conditions. We're seeing, Brian described the situation at Computer Share. We have the situation at Seagate that you're well aware of. It's very disappointing that Invest NI have played such a minor role, if any, in terms of being concerned about what's happening at First Source or at Seagate. I mean, these are huge corporations that have made a lot of money and have had a lot of help from, the corporate wing of Stormont. And it would be helpful if the Secretary of State was coming to visit Derry and actually intervening and playing an active role to stop these companies from just walking away. So, fully support your proposals. And, I know the campaign is very, very difficult because the redundancies are kind of happening. I do see this as a platform for continued organising because, there's lots of people in Derry in the Northwest who have these types of jobs. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. Before, I know that you've made a proposal, you don't have a seconder. I'm going to wait until we have the discussion and then we can discuss the proposal at the end. So the next indicated speaker is Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Gareth and Brian for their presentation. I don't know whether I should or shouldn't declare an interest as a former employee of First Source, but your presentation and your campaign to date has clearly been very noticeable, and I think your suggestions or your asks of council are make a lot of sense whenever we're looking at paying conditions, job losses and things like that, because we often find that whenever these things are announced, we're on the back foot and we're trying to firefight and react to what's going on. And as Sean has said, a lot of the time, well, his bigger partner hasn't said it, but he's sort of pointed towards it. A lot of the time, whenever we're trying to do this, the decision's already been made by the company, and we're trying to manage that, whilst also trying to manage the fears of workers. And unfortunately, in our case here in the City and District, it's large numbers of workers that we're dealing with. For those that work in First Source, beyond no illusion, it's quite a difficult job. There's lots and lots of pressure. I remember when I worked in First Source, getting what's called an RD, a recorded discussion, because my after call was less than 5 seconds. That's 5 seconds, less than 5 seconds to leave a note, hang up and take another call. And if you're doing that for 10 or 12 hours a day, it can be quite, it can play on your own mental health. Make no mistake about it. But that's the type of pressure that those people are under and have been under. And to be brought onto a call very unexpectedly with senior management, 500, I believe, or near that figure, were brought onto the call that day to be told that, you know, our jobs are at risk. And as I say, you know, at that point, it was very clear that it didn't matter what anybody said, that those jobs were going, and it was firefighting at that stage. Gareth, I think it was, whenever he was mentioning the asks that's in the deputation, touched on and said, we don't need political division getting in the way. And I fully agree with you. But I do think that within this council, we've got from all of the political parties and the independents, when it comes to issues like this, we're very good at working together to try and support people. So I don't think that political division, whenever we're talking about people's jobs and terms and conditions, is going to be a big, huge issue that we're going to face. As a party, we have always worked with the Trades Council. We'll continue to do so whenever issues like this come up. I do see a role for some type of a task force, but I see it more being led by the Trades Council and looking for support from elected representatives. And I know that that has been forthcoming and all of these issues. I would just like to understand a wee bit more what you expect of the task force and how you expect that to be managed, because as I think it says in one of the slides, there's a wealth of knowledge and talent within the Trades Council. There's a huge amount of it, and we don't want to see that being diluted or being lost by a task force, which may be caught between red tape in terms of what the council can do and how we can carry things forward. So I would just like to understand how you see the task force working, and then we'll, Chair, with your permission, we'll come back to the proposal from Councillor Harkin once we understand that. But we're not against it at the moment. I just want to understand a wee bit more about it.
So I've got two more indicated speakers, Councillor Donnelly and then Councillor Jackson, and then you can advise on your vision for the task force.
Chair, just on the second Councillor Harkin's proposal, I have spoke to some workers from First Source, and for them it's inevitable that, you know, but when I put this ideas to them, they do think that it's a good idea and it's an important idea. Not particularly for them, they're busted. I think for them at the minute it's down to unions negotiating a good, well, not a good deal, but as good a deal as that is possible. You know, when these firms come here, there's a whole hullabaloo about, you know, and they are welcome and they're welcome jobs. But unfortunately, some firms, you know, when they've got all the benefits and you know, and got everything they've got out of workers, sometimes, you know, they're not as forthcoming and workers' rights and that. So any workers that I have spoke to thought that this would be a good idea for the people who remain there in First Source, because there will be jobs there, and for other people in similar type of employment. So happy to second the proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Good Chair, and welcome to Brian and Gareth. And from our perspective, we're fully supportive of the trade union movement, and we see that issues in relation to workers' rights and the improvements in workers' conditions have all been won and hard won through the trade union movement, and that's something as a party we're fully supportive of. And I know Councillor Tierney alluded to political division, and not, like, when we're talking about people's jobs and the services that they're providing and income that they're relying on. There's no room for politics within that. No. And so I don't foresee that there's going to be too much political division in relation to the need to stand up for workers. It's a process of doing that. There's like quite a lot of what you've presented to us today, we would be fully supportive of. But it's whenever we talk about the role of council, and we don't want to. I want to be clear that we need to respect the role of trade unions, and there needs to be a clear distinction around what the role of a trade union is and the role of a local council. I would see our local council as a key player in terms of engaging with current employers, any potential employers, and to try and attract investment into the Northwest. They create jobs, they create better paid jobs, and in turn, better conditions for workers. I want to see our council officers engage with those investors, those companies. They talk about the barriers, the investment. They identify any gaps in the skill base, and then work in partnership with our skills, our universities and further education sector. They address and they fill those gaps. And with all due respect, I don't want to see our council officers being involved in any sort of campaign that could potentially put off investors. And we want to send a clear message that Darren Strabane is open for business. We want to create jobs. We don't want any potential employer be fearful of their internal business being discussed in an open forum in a council chamber. That's not what we're about. Completely understand that there's a key role for our trade union movement. They be in and having those challenging discussions, and certainly if there's any help that we can provide as a political party, they support our trade union movement throughout that, but we would have serious concerns about setting up structures that could potentially put off investment and put jobs in jeopardy through what is undoubtedly well-meaning proposal, but there's ramifications that we're very mindful of, and our position is clear. We want to send a clear message that Darren Strabane is open for business. We want to attract investment, and we want to support our trade unions to ensure that the jobs that are created are well paid and the conditions are adequate. So in relation to the proposal, it's not necessarily a political division, but we're far from convinced that that's the pathway that's going to achieve any sort of real outcome for workers in the city and district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And the final indicated speaker is Alderman Cook.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. And thanks to the boys too for the presentation. I just want to say that we would be fully supportive of the boys as well. I'm just going to concur with more or less what the other speaker said, but I would be interested as well just to see what role council will be taking and the groups as well, just more or less what Councillor Tierney said. So thanks very much for letting me in.
Thank you, Alderman Cook. So I think that everybody has had their say, and Councillor Tierney had asked Gareth and Brian to share their vision for the task force, because it hasn't been clearly defined. There are varying opinions within the council. So I too would like to hear what you think, how it would operate, what its aims and objectives would be. I'm not sure a council working group is probably the best terminology for it, because what we consider a working group versus what yourselves would consider a working group could be vastly different. If it was a body set up with a Dairy Trade Unions Council that invites political representation, not council officers, that, I think, could work. But I don't think it would be a working group that is set in statute by council. But I'd be really grateful to hear your views on it.
Thank you, Chair. And totally understand the questions and the concerns from some of you about a potential working group. What I can say from my experience, as I alluded to earlier, I'm also a councillor in Yorkshire. And one thing we do is when you have an emotive issue in your community, you look to address it with all those that can influence that issue to the best of the community. So, for example, Better Buses is one that I'm on at the moment. Antisocial behaviour is another working group. But you're right, you have to define the roles within that working group for those that are there. Council, local community groups, trade unions, for example. So what we do, and this can be what part of the proposal, is when we set up a working group, if it's agreed, if any council is involved, there's a terms of reference of what your role is within that working group. You know, if there's any conflict of interest, you step away. But for us, the reason we've asked for you guys to be involved is because you're influencing the community. If we, as unions, yes, we campaign, we're the forefront of any campaign as unions to get better rights for workers. But if we can't engage with the employer and, you know, we've reached a dead end or a barrier, we need help and support in that. And that's where you guys come in, because you have the influence. So for me, that's where I see your role in it. And also to give us the advice of the community as well. You know the community better than myself. So if I'm involved in the group, you can tell me more of different angles of what we need to, you know, what we can expect, what would be the best campaign, what wouldn't be the best campaign. It's just feedback. It's not a out there working group. It's just something behind the scenes to help us achieve what this community deserves.
If I can come in there as well. So first of all, I mean, in terms of the Trades Council running the working group and asking for support from politicians as and when needed, that's the status quo. That's where we are now. Nothing needs set up. That's already in place. So what we're saying is we've came across barriers in this campaign, specifically in relation to First Source, in terms of the employer not engaging with us, it not being a recognised unionised workforce. So are we saying that those staff, you know, if you're not the union, then you shouldn't get any help? What we're trying to do here is recognise that outside of a recognised employer, there's a lot of your constituents, a lot of people from this city who are directly being impacted by poor employers. And I appreciate the concern that we don't want to drive out investment, but we got to remember, who are we going to be challenging? So the only occasion you should be publicly calling out an employer is if they're a bad employer, and in which case you should be brave enough to call them out. And when we say we're concerned about the ramifications for investment, for employers, and that's why we don't want to involve ourselves, what about the ramifications for the people, for the workers? We already have a group in terms of the trade unions, in terms of the Dairy Trades Council, who will advocate for workers. But the issue we want to address through this task force is a mechanism outside of the trade unions where people can still receive support. We've seen that political parties are willing when these announcements are made, because political representation has gone in and you have spoke to the employers. And that's great, and that's in good faith you're doing that. But it became very clear that through no fault of your own, I don't mean this point as a criticism, but there wasn't the knowledge and the expertise that comes with a trade union movement to make those meetings worthwhile and meaningful. We came out of them saying, yes, First Source made these promises. First Source are going to look after the staff. First Source are going to be open and honest. And what have we seen? The complete opposite. To a point where workers, low-paid workers, have gone out of their own pocket to employ a solicitor to ask their employer a question, which they've still not received a response to. What we're saying in essence is something needs done. Employment is too important to this city, and the idea that we sit back because we're concerned there might be problems if we do something isn't acceptable. So we would suggest that we're here to say as political representatives, you have a job to do. I know you are keen to do it. And we're saying, hey, let us help you do that job. Let's make sure that meeting is meaningful. Let's make sure that we give you the knowledge and expertise you need to make sure you challenge appropriately, that you know the questions to ask, the pitfalls that are going to come up. Just think back to that first announcement, those first meetings that some of your parties had with that business and all the promises and how you came out feeling, no, they're going to do right by staff. And then look at where we are now. It didn't work. Either things have changed or you were lied to. That's where we are. So we need to recognise that that process we've all been doing year after year in this city, trying to save jobs, and I know there's sincere intent to do so, I don't doubt it for a second, but we have to recognise that what we've been doing previously isn't working, and it's time to try something new. We're saying, use are the political representatives, use are the leaders, lead. And we will give you all the support, knowledge and expertise we possibly can to make sure you do the best possible job. And that's what we're asking for. Thank you.
Would anybody like to comment further? Councillor Hargan?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think that there is, like, we're in a cost of living crisis. We have two major employers in Derry who have, I would say, done a lot of damage recently in terms of jobs, which is very, very unfortunate, and nobody wants to see that. And I think that for a lot of people, there's tremendous frustration, and people are losing their livelihoods as well, and there's a lot of people who are not sure what they're going to do next. And I think what we're talking about here is what can the council do? And I think that there's a perception that government doesn't do enough to support workers. Government does a tremendous amount to support business. I mean, that is not even debated anymore. So I think what we're being asked to do today is find a way for the council to be more proactive in standing up in defence of workers. So that the request, I think that, and I mentioned this to Brian and Gareth before, I think that if we can reduce the proposal to one, let's call it a task force, because I think that the four things that you're asking are reasonable. What role can we play in getting answers from First Source? Because they've refused to give you answers. They've refused to give political parties answers. That's just wrong. And clearly, that's why I was saying, what did Invest NI? What's Invest NI's relationship to First Source? Did they ask them any questions? Who has assisted First Source since they were here? So that's one request. Two is, I'm just going through them, when jobs are at risk, what can the council actually do? How can we look at job disparity or pay disparity? I think that that's a reasonable request that we can have a task force on and have some discussions about what more or what else can the council do. And look, our council already has decided to take very strong positions on workers' rights and social justice. I don't think setting up this task force in light of what's happened at First Source and what Brian and Gareth are telling us today will make much difference to how people, or how some perceive us.
Councillor Mooney?
Thank you, Chair. I was just sitting listening, and I think I probably understand the concept of it, and I've got the concept in a way, but it's more interested probably in the mechanics of how the intended task force would sort of roll out. And would you advise it? I'm sort of thinking in the minute, would it be like an ad hoc basis if there was like interventions required? Obviously now the situation's First Source, but would it be the First Source is resolved and then there's no other matters on the horizon? So how does it engage? Do you come on the council and say, I need your intervention here, or we're in a dispute with X, Y, and Z? Things are working out, negotiations are protracted, we think we've come to a stalemate, and I think now we need to have this sort of political intervention of local council. Is that when he's intervened? Is this more of a situation? Because my mind is like a sort of ad hoc sort of institution or arrangement rather than a sort of, a fully full standing task force. And Perhaps you want me, if you could maybe sort of tease that out for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you two opposite answers to that. So first and foremost, I mean, as I, would envision this, I see it as a task force or a reactionary force at its nature. But you'll see in there, and I've kind of put it as a few different proposals, but they all could fall under the remit of one task force. So yes, you have the initial response and reaction to when we hear of potential announcements. And just very loosely to give you an idea of what day one might look like when that happens. So it could be where you seek a meeting with the employer, you sit down, and through the trade unions, you'll have a series of questions that will help you gauge what got them here. Have they taken the sufficient steps to try and mitigate, so reduce or potentially stop any actions that may be taken? You would talk about the support mechanisms that are going to be put in place to make sure that staff are kept updated along this process. It's an incredibly fearful and stressful position for anybody to be in, especially as we're running up. Christmas is going to be around the corner. So we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions to begin with. Outside of that initial reactionary position, so what you might do when, let's hope we're in a position someday, no employers making any redundancies. Well, that's when we talk about, well, let's look at the other impacts. So, pay and conditions could be something which is reviewed. You can do that by engaging with employers across the city to understand what's the general standard of terms and conditions. Where does it lie? Where is it high? Where is it low? Is it impacting low-paid younger workers more than older workers, etc.? So there is the reactionary part of it, which is always have to be reactionary by the nature of it, because you're going to hear of a redundancy, you're going to react to it. But there's ongoing things that could be done around that engagement, around pay and conditions. As Brian talked about, that engagement around the disparity, where people are getting paid in this city and region far less, by thousands of pounds, far less money, doing the exact same job for the exact same company than somebody that's sitting there, maybe in the south or across GB. So these are legitimate questions. And again, I mean, I know some concerns that I appreciate. You don't want to be seen as just purely out there trying to beat down employers. We need employers. Without employers, we don't have workers. But again, this is about focusing on making things better. So it's not to say every employer must do X, Y, and Z, or we're going to be on their back. It's about engaging with them and understanding, is there a way, maybe through support, that we could get them to improve pay and conditions? But let's be honest, there will also be employers who are making an absolute mint, and they're doing that by paying their workers very little wage or conditions. We also have to be alive to the good employers in this town who are generally trying to give people a good standard of living. And those employers are undercut by the bad employers because they get to pay people pittance and give them no conditions and no job security. So when we're concerned about, employers, then what about the fact that the employers out there who are generally trying to give people an honest living to the best they can, try to be as fair as they can, are getting screwed over because we're allowing these bad employers to go ahead and undercut everybody? So we're creating a situation in which employment is incentivized to treat people badly and pay them poorly. This must be counteracted. We have to do something to try push back at this. And I suggested many years ago to this council, maybe not the same people here, if you still want to, I'm not suggesting this here, but just a point to make, if you still want to focus so much on the bad employer, at least start calling out the good employers. Start pointing out this guy's supporting our community because he's paying people a living wage. There's so much more we could be doing, from either side of the field. But ultimately, sorry to summarise your question, it would be in essence, at its heart, reactionary in terms of redundancies, or if there's major issues on conditions. We had the Equality Commission had recently set up an independent email address specifically for workers in Northern Ireland who are working for McDonald's, given everything that's going on there. We'll not repeat it all just now. But that shows you that crises can arise not just from redundancy, but from the conditions that people are being forced to work in. And this task force will respond to all those issues. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gareth. We've spoken about this for quite a while, and it's a very important issue, but we have a lot of other agenda items to get through. I'm conscious that the Councillor Harkin has a proposal which is seconded by Councillor Donnelly, but I'm going to ask Councillor Harkin's permission if I may make a separate proposal because there is a bit of vagueness here in terms of the purpose of the task force. I would suggest that officers from the council engage with the Dairy Call Centre campaign to establish a potential terms of reference for this working group with a paper to come back to for their committee, so the members are fully aware of the role, the responsibility. That's my proposal.
Chair, thank you. Two questions. One on your proposal. Would it not be the officers engaged with the Dairy Trade Unions Council as opposed to the Dairy Call Centre campaign? Because it's in the proposals that's on the paper, it talks an awful lot about the Trade Union Council as opposed to the singular campaign. And the second thing, in terms of any working group, task force, or whatever you want to call it, being set up, what is your vision of the membership of it? Is it all elected councillors? Is it one from each party? What way do you see that? Or is that something now with your proposal that we'll see coming back from officers? But I'm happy to support your proposal and second it.
Thank you. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just hear from Gareth and Brian about what they think of your proposal, that would be helpful.
So first of all, yeah, in terms of the Dairy Trades Council engagement instead of through the Dairy Call Centre campaign, yeah, that is preferred. And again, through the Dairy Trades Council, we've obviously got all the trade unions in the city. So, you know, there might be an issue that rises isn't specific to call centres, in which case it'd be better that way. And that's why we've proposed it in that regard. Sorry, there was a second question in regards to your own proposal.
I think there was one from Concertini about how many councillors were.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
There is, but if we're going to go with this proposal, I'm happy to see what the paper comes back and suggests, but it's whatever way you want it.
Yeah, so look, I'm comfortable with his, you know, sitting down. Like, I think the key to all this is the key principle of this. I believe that the trade unions and the council need to work together. So in terms of proposals, sitting down and hammering out the detail, I'm absolutely comfortable with that.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, a couple of points. I suppose I'm a wee bit confused in relation to the original proposal. Was suggested that because we know that there are engagements with political parties and the Trade Unions Council, and I know if there's any assistance that the Trade Unions Council requests from us, will never be found wanting. And if what is being suggested is that on an ad hoc basis, if the Trade Union Council calls on representatives from all political parties, not necessarily members of this council, but you know, at any level of a political party, they will engage with the Trade Unions Council and support them in any way we can. That already happens, and if we confirm that up, 100% we're supportive of that. The question is in relation to council involvement, and whether it's council's role to take on the role of a trade union, because that's essentially what we're asking, and that's not what council should be doing. And it's going back to that fundamental point: as elected representatives and members of political parties, most of us will support trade unions. Most of us will, if there's a trade union campaign that we're asked to lend our support to, we'll support when we can. So there's no need for an additional structure, but if we just want to formalise and say and make that commitment that we're here, we've no problem in doing that. But it's when we're formalising and asking council to get involved is something that we've got difficulty with. It's not the role of council, and that's. So I just wanted to put it out there. If we were initially speaking about continuing and more formalising what already takes place, we've no issue with that. But if we're talking about setting up new structures that involves councils, then it's not our role. And with all due respect to the campaign, it's worth pointing that out, that it's not the role of councils to be stepping into the realms of trade unions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Jackson. And I think if this committee agrees to the proposal that we set up, the terms of reference, I would hope the terms of reference would clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the trade union members and the council members. Councillor Hargan.
Thank you. Yeah, look, in response to Councillor Jackson, I feel council should be an advocate for trade unions. I think it should be an advocate for workers' rights. I think it should make that its primary job. I don't think everybody will agree with that. And I think that in terms of government today, I think government is found wanting in terms of standing up for workers' rights. And we only have to look at working conditions across our district to see that. We've got the lowest median wage of any council district in the north. You know, we're not going to go through all the statistics, but clearly government isn't doing enough to be advocating for workers' rights and supporting trade unionism. And I think that that's what this is about. So I don't think that we will be taking on as a council the bargaining that a union does, or joining up with the ICTU, or getting involved in that level of detail. This is about when there is, I would call what's happened at First Source an emergency. I would call what's happened at Seagate, unfortunately, where we have advocated and we have participated, the same thing. So we already do this. So if the campaign, if Gareth and Brian are happy to support Councillor Farrell's proposal, I'm happy to back that as well.
Thanks, Councillor Hargan. Final speaker on this item is Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair, and I can understand and appreciate where Councillor Jackson's coming from, but I think what we sort of need to do is differentiate between the role of council officers on this potential task force or working group and the role of council members on it. And that's why I asked earlier about the membership of it, because make no mistake, if the Trade Union Council call a meeting for 7 o'clock tonight, there'll be a member, I would suggest, from each political party represented in this council at that meeting. If that's what you want, and as Councillor Jackson's already outlined, that already happens. But if what you're looking for is a representative of each political party and independents, and then a brand of council officers and trade union representatives sitting around the one table, that might be slightly more difficult, which is why I've asked earlier about how do you see the membership of this workforce or task force? What does it look like? Because I think that might help clear up some of the questions that's been asked. Hopefully, if we go with the chair's proposal, that'll be cleared up within the terms of reference. But it might make for an easier discussion here if we kind of had an idea of what it is that you were expecting from council members and then council corporately as a body, because I think it's two separate roles on this particular task force. Thank you.
Right. So I think we've debated this to an extent. So I think there's been no dissent in terms of the proposal. Council officers will engage with the Trade Unions Council to formulate terms of reference that clearly define the roles, responsibilities, purposes of the group. And the paper will come back for further consideration at this committee. Yeah.
With respect, I would like an answer to my question.
Can that not be hammered out in the terms of reference? So thanks very much for your attendance, folks. So in terms of the rest of the agenda, agenda item 15 is the financial outturn but I'm going to move that to after matters arising. And then we can continue with the rest of the agenda following that. In terms of chairperson's business, there are 3 items. I've got 1, and Councillor Harkin has 2. My one's on housing, and I am conscious that the housing executive are going to be here at this committee next month to give us an update on the investment plan. But I want to touch briefly on the waiting list figures that were released 2 weeks ago. The waiting list for people accessing social housing across this city and district now sits at over 5,800 people. It's an increase in over 300 in the last quarter. It's at a record high. Literally, the amount of people on social housing waiting lists has never been higher across this city and district. There's nearly 6,000 applicants, but that's not 6,000 people. That's, an applicant is one person. They could have a partner. They could have 1 child, 2 children. The number of people waiting to be housed across this city and district, it could be 15 or 20,000 people. The reality is not enough houses are being built, and the current level of construction has just led to spiralling waiting lists for housing. And I feel that we should invite officers from the housing supply unit within the Department for Communities to a meeting of this committee to understand how they're going to address the housing crisis in the city and district. And I know there was a motion back in February where we called for clarity from the Department for the Economy on the impact of having no executive on the housing supply strategy. As far as I'm aware, we haven't received any response to that as yet. So that could be an agenda item as well. So my proposal, and I've sent it to Paula already. It's pretty straightforward. Council will invite officials from the Housing Supply Unit at the Department for Communities to brief members on plans to tackle the growing housing crisis across Derry and Strabane and to provide an update on the Department's housing supply strategy. So very straightforward. Councillor Mooney, thank you for seconding. Councillor Duffy.
I was just going to come on to second as well, Chair. I think that it is timely. I think that we are in a situation where we have been facing into a housing crisis for much too long, and the fact that we have no executive at the minute is just exasperating that completely. So I think that it would be good to get an update on where we're at with it and the impact that having no executive is having on the housing supply. So happy to support.
Mr. Jackson.
Thanks, Chair. And I know Sandra's indicated our support for the proposal. And I was going to come on this as part of the annual performance report. But I think it's sort of appropriate in my comment now. As part of the performance report, there is an element, there is a section on housing. And there's reference to council being involved in discussions in relation to HMOs and there's figures in relation to the number of HMOs in our city and district. Our licensed HMOs, we all know that there's quite a lot of unlicensed HMOs, as you're undoubtedly familiar, Chair, but I think given that our council have planning function, we're well placed in terms of creating opportunities and encouraging development, and we've certainly got a role to play in the delivery of housing, are supposed to facilitate the delivery of housing. It's a suggestion or proposal that as part of future, as part of the future annual performance reports, that we have figures in relation to the house number, the number of units that have been built within our city and district, and what steps we're taking to facilitate that development, because there needs to, as you rightly pointed out, the waiting lists are rising. We need a step change in terms of providing homes, and it just jumped at me as part of our annual performance report. Housing needs to be up there in terms of one of our key targets to deliver, because they do that. Not only is it providing homes for the thousands of people that are on the waiting lists, it also supports council as well in terms of a rate-based growth. So it needs to be a focus of ours, and it needs to be there in lights as part of the annual performance report. So I would just make that point. I was planning to make it later on in the meeting, but now is as good as time as any. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly.
Good Chair. No, I welcome the proposal, and probably not a councillor or alderman on here that doesn't deal with housing on a daily basis, but it's good to see it on the agenda, and we need to keep it on the agenda, and we need to, I think at the last figures were something like 5,300. I would say there's a good chance that's probably closer to 6,000. Now, there's a crisis, an absolute crisis, and if people, you know, one of the what kicked the civil rights off and what created the housing executive, you know, was that whole lack of housing and lack of social housing. So anything that's going to shine a light onto this, or, you know, maybe down the line, I don't know if we could possibly set up a working group or a task force. You know, it's probably not a proposal for here now, but you know, going forward, we definitely need to be looking at this. Anybody who's dealing with these issues can see the desperation and the people that we're working with, and like I've had to remove names from my records of people that never got housed, and I'm not saying it's, you know, it's a result of not having that house, but it contributed to them no longer being on this earth. So it's a massive, massive issue. There's probably not a day that somebody doesn't get a phone call and they are on that line. There's a desperate mauler or faller. And when I say desperate, I mean, you know, really getting it tight. So happy to hope to support the proposal. Thank you.
All right, so that's proposed and seconded and no dissent. So thank you, folks. Councillor Hargan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had two issues that I asked that I'd be allowed to raise, and thanks for obliging me as the step-in chair. And I'll just send Paul one of them right now, if that's all right. I'm sure people have seen that the ICTU met in Armagh in August, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and have announced a wave of industrial action that's happening right across the north. That's going to involve public sector and private sector workers. And we know many of these issues. It's wage disparity. It's the failure to pay workers inflationary wages based on inflation. But it's also about all the cuts that that have been rammed through by Stormont departments. And I think that this is something that our council should be taking a very clear position on. I think that we need to send a clear message that we back these strikes. It's unfortunate the strikes are happening, but they're necessary. And I would fully echo the comments that the ICTU Secretary for the North, Jerry Murphy, said, which is that there is no government here, but that the working class and the labour movement won't wait to fight for justice, and that these strikes right now are attempting to address pay disparity, pay inequality, pay justice, but also challenge the billions of cuts that this psychopath Tory Secretary of State has now rammed through. And I'm sure people seen his comments this week where he said he wouldn't be initiating a bailout for the North because it's not what we need. And I think we have to make it very clear that that's exactly what we need right now. We need an end to the punishment budgets that the Secretary of State is ramming through. It's causing immense misery right across our society. And whether Stormont is up and running, I think it should be up and running, but whether it is or not, the Secretary of State should be ending the punishment budgets and actually initiating a bailout emergency. The same thing has been done for big corporations over and over again. Why not do it right now for people right across the North? And I think that that's a direct response to what the Secretary of State has said, and also it's supporting what the trade unions are trying to articulate right now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Harkin. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Jackson?
Well, I was initially going to second the proposal, but so in that vein, they say that we have no issue supporting the motion or the proposal. I think the sentiment behind it has been, it's coming on the back of the exact same demands that have been made by the former finance minister and the first minister designate. Punishment budget inflicted on the people of the North, intended they put pressure on the DUP who are refusing to go to work, is failing society right across. Our public sector is squealing, and we can see it within councils, the impact of the lack of an executive and the failure to acknowledge the pressures that are here from a British government who don't care. So if this is continuing on that vein, I've no doubt that the former finance minister and the future first minister will continue to keep the pressure on. But anything we can do as council to help in that regard, we should do so. That's in that sense we support the motion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Donnelly? No, right. Okay. Councillor Tierney?
Chair, what I was saying is that it did jump in. They've seconded, but I'm happy if Councillor Jackson seconds it. Apologies.
That can be noted. Councillor Tierney?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Harkin for the proposal. We've no issue either in supporting it. I think I particularly like the second part where we'll write to the British Secretary of State, and the last line, I suppose, around whether Stormont's working or not, because what it is very clear what the Secretary of State is doing is using us, all of our public services, all of our workers and everybody across the North are being punished because the DUP have thrown their toys out of the pram. That can't be allowed to continue. If you look at all of the issues that we deal with here as local councillors, from workers' issues, pay, to things like the Brandywell, the rates, all of that can't happen because there's no budget. And that's realistically what's happening. You know, the Brandywell 2017, we were preparing a bid for phase 2 of the Brandywell. Stormont fell for 3 years. It was back for another year while the minister was reading the review of the regional substadia fund. It fell again. Still no movement on the Brandywell. One small issue there in Strabane. Can't be allowed to continue. There has to be something. The Secretary of State needs to, in my opinion, grow a backbone. And where the DUP are failing to make these decisions, needs to come in and urgently address some of them. People will have seen that our MPs, Colin Eastwood and Claire Hanna, have called for a bigger role from the Irish government in terms of setting the Northern Ireland budget. If the Secretary of State wants to use people in the North as a pawn in a game with the DUP, and he hasn't got the guts, in my opinion, to make hard decisions, then let him use his support from the Irish government, and let both of them make them as well. But let's get our public services back up and running. Let's get decisions made, and let's get these punishment budgets as is outlined in the proposal stopped, and let's get the public sector, the finances and the support that it needs to run smoothly and support people across the north. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Tierney. So that was proposed by Councillor Hargan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. No dissent, so that's agreed. And your final proposal, Councillor Hargan.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for their support for that. People may have seen that a lot of Seagate workers are finishing up. There's been a lot of posts on social media. I've talked to quite a few people, and it's disappointing that so many people decided, so many workers there that had worked for so long, made the decision to take voluntary redundancy, and I think that speaks volumes. But Seagate is still there. Hundreds of people still work there, and the workers that remain that I've spoke to are very determined to continue the campaign for trade union representation. They're obviously worried about job security in light of the voluntary redundancies and some of the issues around the company. There is, from what I can tell, talking to people and following discussions on social media, a continued effort by senior management. There's a lot of hostility to the union. But one important thing happened during the summer, which I think is important for us to note, was the industrial courts ruling, which went in Unite's favour, which was about the categorisation of workers. So that was an important ruling, and I think it's important that we note it, given that we have been advocating on behalf of the Seagate workers and have supported them, and that there will be a next step. And look, I've talked to a lot of workers who've taken voluntary redundancy, and they are very eager to see the union, the trade union campaign completed, because they want new workers and the workers who are remaining there to be able to benefit from having protection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hargan. Do you have a seconder for that? So, Councillor Tierney, you wish to second?
Yep, thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to second the proposal. I suppose really all it's asking for is an update on the previous meetings that we have had, given the conditions now at Seagate with voluntary redundancy and one thing and another. I think it's important that we do follow up on that work. I think Council at that particular time we're very proactive in trying to support the Seagate workers. We had a number of meetings with workers, and then we had a very robust meeting with management that was across the way in Harbour House. But I think it's important now that given where it's at and given that there will be some workers in Seagate now worrying even more so than they were when we met them originally about their own future, I think it's important that we do follow it up. So we in the SDLP are happy to support the proposal, and if I'm being honest, would like to see the meeting take place sooner rather than later, because this process, for anybody who has been following it, changes quite rapidly and quite quickly. So we would like to get an understanding of where it's at now. I know that, and maybe Councillor Harkin might know more than this than what I do, but I know there was a push from Seagate workers to get enough people to sign up to the trade union, and there was a figure that they had to reach. I understand that the campaign did reach it, but now with the voluntary redundancies that have been taken, do we know if that figure, obviously you would imagine the figure is reduced, but do we know if it is still, the reduced figure has been met by those that are still remaining in employment from that? I'm just curious to find out. Maybe that's something we can find out at the meeting, but if anybody has it now at hand, it would be useful to know.
Would you be privy to that information, Councillor Hargan?
Question, and I think we this is exactly what we should talk to the workers and the Unite reps about. My understanding is that yes, it's the unit that the union was seeking to have representation for will be reduced, but that from the people I've spoken to on the Workers' Committee and people who've been very involved in it, they're still confident that there'll be the numbers to actually have a vote on that, or it might not be. There might not be a vote if there's been a majority for it.
Cheers. So final indicated speaker is Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, no, I just think there might be a wee bit of confusion because Concertini referred to a meeting that happened across the way in Harbour House. That was with Seagate Management. The motion is calling for a meeting for Unite Rates and Seagate workers, and we would be supportive of that. But again, to re-emphasise the point is that we fully support the call for trade union recognition, and if there's anything that we can do to support unions and to support the Seagate workers to try and advance that, absolutely. But the premise is that the workers have, and I'm sort of re-emphasising some of the points that were made in the big hall with the Seagate workers. Workers have the power themselves. They organise and they ballot on trade union recognition, and we've seen that, and that's been demonstrated by what we were talking about earlier, and that when a certain threshold is met, then there's legal responsibilities, and there's a legal avenue to have the trade union recognised. So if it's another opportunity for us, they get that message across to workers. They say that the power is in their hands. They mobilise and encourage as many people as possible to sign up to the union. That's what's going to deliver this. It's not political pressure. It's not anything that's said in this chamber, and it's not anything that's printed on newspaper headlines. It's workers themselves encouraging others to join, and workers keep banding together, organising and having that structure. So that in that sense, if we're meeting with the workers and we're meeting with the unions to encourage trade union representation, 100% we support that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And before I bring Alderman Hussey in, Councillor Tierney wants a second of our time.
It's by the by, I suppose, but when I was talking about the meeting in Harbour House, I said that there was a very robust meeting with the management at Seagate, which is what I was talking about. So if there's any confusion about that, that's what I was talking about. I wasn't talking about, I was given an outline, or I suppose a timeline of the support that Council has given to this campaign already. And I made the point that it was a robust meeting with senior management at Seagate that met in Harbour House along with councillors. So if there's any confusion, I'm afraid it's at that side of the room and not at this side of the room, Chair.
Okay, Alderman Hussey.
Well, speaking from the middle of the room. Chair, firstly, apologies for late arrival. With regard to the unionisation scenario, if the quota is achieved, as has rightly been pointed out, there's a legal requirement that the union can be allowed to establish. But it's just clarification on something that Councillor Harkin said. He said that it was a unit within Seagate that were seeking union recognition. I had understood it was all of Seagate that were seeking representation. Is that so?
Thank you, Alderman Hussey, for the question. And again, the best people to address these questions to is the Unite workers and the workers at Seagate and the Unite reps. My understanding is Seagate is 1,600 workers. There's different categories of workers. They do different things, and that Unite wants to organise everyone, but that they were they have members in every category or every unit, but that they were based on people's job at the plant. They sought to have a category that they would seek unionisation for first, and that's what the industrial court ruled on. That they agreed with the Unite on that unit. So if that's not clear enough, I would take the next step and talk to the union.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Hurgan.
Okay, so that was proposed by Councillor Hargan, seconded by Councillor Tierney. No dissent. So that's passed. So we move on. So item 7 is matters arising from the open minutes of the governance and strategic plan. So,
Chair, before you move to that, will you allow me to just mention one item of information?
yeah.
It's just to let members know that there will be a vigil in Castleberg tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. If anyone can get along to that, and it's in regard to the tragedy that occurred in our town centre. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alderman Hussey. Just terrible tragedy in Castleberg. I know thoughts and prayers coming out from everybody in the council. Councillor O'Farrell.
Just bhfuilam Cion Sinn Féin, Cobra Yanni LeClan, Conor Brown and Farrell Jennifer Bass. I'd just like to offer condolences to Conor Brown's family. And again, there's the vigil in Castleberg tomorrow night. Grumagara, a Carly.
So item 7 is matters arising from the last meeting of governance in July. So does anyone have any items that they wish to raise? Councillor Duffy.
Caramaga Chair. I have 2 items, if you would indulge me. The first is GSP 102 in terms of the update in the hardship fund. And the issue I want to raise under that is the Electric Ireland issue. I have been contacted, I'll not say inundated, but I have had at least a dozen calls, text messages and frantic phone calls, even late into last night. There's quite a number of people throughout this city and district who have been affected by this. Some have had no electric over the weekend. They still have no electric today. We talk about a cost of living crisis and where things are at. A lot of these people are all on keypad meters. They're on keypad meters because that's how they budget their money. They have been sitting now with no electric. Their fridges are off, their freezers are off, food has been destroyed. These are young mothers, they're young people on their own. There is all sorts of issues that have been raised because of this. Electric Ireland have put out a phone number for people to be able to contact. They're not actually answering the phone. So a lot of these people are having absolutely no answers. But when they're contacting me, I have no answer for them and I feel very helpless in terms of my response to them. Some have gone to stay with parents and gone to stay with other family members, but some simply can't do that because they don't have anyone else. But in terms of the loss of goods that they have within their freezers and stuff, I would propose that at this point that we write to Electric Ireland. I know they're saying that they're working through the problem. They're hoping to have it resolved either Wednesday or Thursday of this week. That's untenable, to be honest, when, you know, this has been a problem that's been going on since Friday. But I think that we should write to Electric Ireland and ask them what their response is going to be and ask them, are they planning on any compensation for people who have lost considerable amount of goods that they cannot afford to replace at this time? We are in a cost of living emergency. We do have a lot of hardship around, and I think that's absolutely disgraceful in terms of Electric Ireland that they're not even at this point. How they're communicating to people is putting out Twitter information tweets. That's not on. And they're not even responding to the Twitter account when people are tweeting them. It's Electric Ireland down south that's actually responding, which is just completely unacceptable. So with your indulgence, Chair, I would like to just propose that we write to Electric Ireland to ask them what their plans are for compensation for the people who have been affected.
Councillor Boggs. Thank you, Councillor Boggs. Councillor Donnelly.
Chair, just to agree with Councillor Duffy's remarks there, you know, the effect of this on people, you know, that's already suffering can't be overestimated. You know, sitting in their home for days without electricity, absolutely shocking. And these are companies that make vast fortunes on the back of ordinary people. It's not acceptable, and just happy and I'd like to thank Councillor Duffy for highlighting that here, and happy to support the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hargan.
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely agree with Councillor Duffy's proposal. I mean, Electric Ireland, as Councillor Donnelly said, are making massive profits, and things like this sometimes happen where there's glitches, but it's the lack of urgency that's the problem. If you don't pay your bill, they come down on you like a ton of bricks, and there's all sorts of measures. They go after people and they go after people. When it's not them making money, when it's them having to do something, this is the response we constantly get from these big energy companies. So whatever we can do to put a spotlight on that and put a bit of pressure on them, we should absolutely do it. So absolutely endorse it.
Councillor Tierney.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Duffy for raising it. We've no issue in supporting the proposal either. As others have said, you know, people are sitting all weekend. We know electricity. It's not acceptable. But I'm finding that it's the responses that are more frustrating whenever they're literally just being ignored. And the fact that people are feeling that they have to take to Twitter to try and find out what's going on is ridiculous. I know people have a lot of faith in social media and all that there, but it's a bit ridiculous if that's what people have to do. I do think that the company should be compensating people for their losses, particularly given the times that people are living in and how much people are struggling at the moment. So we have no issue in supporting the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. So there was no dissent there. A letter will go to Electric Ireland. Have you a second item that you want to raise, Councillor Duffy? Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the support for that last one. The second one is GSP 108, and the issue I want to raise in relation to that is the airport. I'm not going to rehearse everything that we know about the airport and the importance of it for connectivity for the Northwest, or the fact that at times it can be under pressure. But I will say this, in terms of the Dublin PSO, we are on a very tight timescale in trying to get anything agreed. So in terms of a cross-border approach, in terms of the Northwest City region, where 40% of passengers coming from Donegal, I think it's timely that we link up with Donegal in terms of our approach to this. I know that we have been working very closely in relation to that over many years, but I would like to see a delegation from our council and Donegal Council meeting with the Minister for Transport, Jack Chambers, just to discuss how we can progress the Dublin PSO, because it's a really important piece of infrastructure that we need for the containment of the airport going forward. So if I could make that a formal proposal.
Happy to second that, Chair. And I think it is important that it is the cross-border element that is addressing that.
Councillor Tierney.
Happy to support the proposal. And if that meeting is taking place, there will be SDLP representation at it. We understand and value the role of the airport right across for people right across the Northwest, and any opportunities that we can help open up to protect the airport should be looked at, in our view, right now as a matter of urgency, to see what we can do to try and help it. So we're happy with the proposal. And again, I think I've said this a couple of times today, I would like to see that meeting take place as soon as possible as well, because this is a very urgent issue in our view. Thank you.
So I have no further indicated speakers and no dissent, so that motion is passed. Any further items for matters arising? None? Okay. I'm going to move to what should have been item 15, which is the financial return. So Alfie, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the report is to approve our 3-month outturn position, essentially the first quarter of the year 23-24. This follows what you'll know has been a difficult rates process in which we had to deal with a number of financial pressures and ultimately culminated in us agreeing a 73.96 million net expenditure budget, which is set out for your information in section 2.1 of the report. You'll be aware that that process included a substantial savings programme, 3.697 million across all our services, and that we also retained a contingency reserve and brought forward a 5.938 million to mitigate against a number of risks which emerged shortly after the rates process, such as rate support grant cuts and unknown pressures around pay awards and other issues. So members, obviously it's important that you're updated regularly in respect of our financial position to identify any issues or pressures, and this report obviously sets that out for you. So there's a detailed report in the appendix and it's summarised in the table in section 3.1 of the report. So whilst it's early in the year, members, it is pleasing to report at this stage that at month 3 we show an underspend of 435k, and that's pleasing, particularly given the level of savings that have been implemented during that first quarter. So I'll just run through the highlights and in relation to what's contributed to that underspend. So firstly, we've seen growth in our income levels during the quarter. The key variances there being our leisure income, bank interest, planning and building control income, and it's pleasing to see in particular that our leisure income has returned and exceeded to pre-pandemic levels, and also the continuing growth in building activity and new developments in the council area despite the wider global challenges. Secondly, we have savings in our electricity, oil and gas budgets, mainly in leisure facilities. That reflects a recent reduction in prices below what we would have forecast during the rates process. And generally, members, all service areas are trying to control expenditure through vacancy control, travel, etc. And that's a common theme throughout all the service areas. You will note, members, that within the health and community, we have made a provision in relation to a number of emerging health and safety maintenance requirements across leisure facilities. And those will be the subject of a detailed report to you through Health and Community Committee in due course to approve the specific items of expenditure. There are a number of unbudgeted costs and pressures such as insurance costs, severance costs, rate support grant cut. They haven't impacted our position, thankfully, because we had those fully provided for within our reserves, thankfully. In relation to rates income, LPS are reporting a small projected positive finalisation at the end of Q1. We've chosen not to report that, members, because you'll see the risks that have been highlighted in the report, further increase in revaluation appeals and the significant level of rating debt that exists. So again, that further justifies the need for the reserve we retain in that regard. In relation to rate support grant, again, we have no overspend in respect of that because we earmark funds within that financial contingency reserve again. And for your information, the judicial review process with Mid-Ulster is progressing. And in relation to reserves, the final point, you'll be aware that we're planning to utilise 1.25 million from our district fund and that we need to reduce that in the upcoming rates process with an associated rates impact. So it's a consideration, obviously, that any surpluses generated during the year could be used to retain our balance and reduce the implications for the 24-25 rates. So members, in conclusion, it's a positive position, particularly given the savings that have been implemented. I have noted that it's early in the year and that a few items, if we hadn't had our financial contingency reserve in place, would have certainly significantly reduced that position. Also, members, even since writing the report, we continue to be made aware of some new challenges. So I know there's issues in relation to animal welfare grant cuts and also CCTV that need to be addressed. And again, those will be brought through the relevant committee. I've included at the very end of the report, members, in section 3.4, just an updated assessment in respect of that financial contingency reserve we have. Obviously, some of those figures are estimated and we need to keep that under close review as the year progresses. And finally, in terms of the rates process, just for your info, it's not in the report. The next joint meeting of the Finance Working Group and Capital and Corporate Projects Planning Group has been scheduled for 25th of September. So that will be circulated to you in the coming days. So the recommendation, members, is that you approve our Q1 position and the associated considerations detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alfie. Very promising start to the year. Over £400,000 underspent, so that's good, and long may it continue. So the first indicated speaker is Councillor Heaney.
Thanks, Chair, and just thank Alfie for the very comprehensive report, and I'm happy to propose the recommendation.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Alfie for the report. I think somewhere along the line, Alfie said that he needs us to approve the underspend. I think we'll all be happy to do that. And hopefully it keeps going that way. We all know the pressures that Council are under and the difficult RITS process that we came through last year. And to see that at this stage of the year that there's over 400,000 underspent, that's positive. And hopefully it keeps going that way, because the more we save, that little bit easier, it'll make the next RITS process that we're heading on. So I think it's good news, and I would like to, on behalf of the SDLP, pass on our thanks to all the officers who have worked a very tight budget to ensure that this has happened. Thank you.
Alderman Hussey.
Very simply, ditto. And thanks, Alfie, for the report. The comments have all been made by others. One quick question, the Finance Working Group, will that take place in the morning of the 25th? The reason I'm asking that is I'm aware that there is a planned meeting at 1 o'clock, reference signage, and there's training then later on that afternoon. Thank you.
All right, good stuff, folks. So proposed by Councillor Heaney, seconded by Councillor Tierney, no dissent. So that has passed. Next item on the agenda is the All Island Strategic Rail Review consultation. And we've got Rachel to take us through that item.
You, Chair. This item really comes from the discussion that we had at our last Governance and Strategic Planning Committee in relation to all things rail. And really it is just to formally update you that obviously the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review, as you're probably aware, was published as a draft report for the Strategic Environmental Assessment consultation on the 25th of July. And I suppose good news is that the review recognised a particularly strong response from the Northwest. So, as you know, it's really, this review's looking at how the rail network can contribute to decarbonisation, how it can promote sustainable connectivity between cities across the island and support balanced regional development. And it's looking within a broad timescale. It covers from today, 2023, up to 2050. To align with both governments' goal for net zero by 2050. So the full document's attached at Appendix 1, members, for your information, and it's summarised there in your report in section 3.3. Really the high level outputs of this in terms of this region is that it recognises Londonderry as one of the 7 major cities on the island of Ireland. And crucially, it proposes a £3 billion dual track railway connecting Derry, Strabane, Omagh, Dungannon with Portadown, and 170 million rail track from Derry to Letterkenny. The report also references the upgrades planned for the Derry to Coleraine route. Under the Sustainable Cities recommendation, it'll explore the case for developing new stations in this region, including a spur for Limavady. It doesn't recommend railways through the northwest of Ireland coastal region, which is something that we had put forward in terms of our consultation response. And in terms of speeds, members, you'll know that it's an electrified network that they're proposing with top speeds of 200 kilometres per hour. Yet only it suggests the one from Derry to Portadown would be 160 kilometres per hour, and we're the only city that recommendation is. So in terms of that, it defines work in this region as a medium-term intervention. What they say is that with the recommendation is that the stations to be complete between 2030 to 2040 and an aspiration to start extending the railway from Portadown to Derry and Letterkenny within this time, and everything to be complete by 2050. So, members, we have looked at this in some detail, and you'll also be advised that following a request from Into the West, the Chief Executive and the Director of Environment and Regeneration met with them just to discuss the report and some of the recommendations to align sort of, I suppose, responses as well too. So we have drafted some bullet points in terms of a response to this review for Council to consider. It's there in section 3.6, obviously to welcome the recommendation in terms of the rail connectivity through Strabane and Omagh and to Dungannon, and really just to ask that we initiate immediate full route selection feasibility study for this area in the report. Also, the language in the report talks about Portadown to Derry, and we're sort of keen that the rhetoric is that it's the Derry to Dublin route to reinforce the interregional city connectivity piece, and not so that we just stop in Portadown and change there or something. We also are going to strongly advocate that the connectivity should be 200 kilometres per hour, as in the connectivity with other city regions, and not 160 kilometres per hour. So that's one of the recommendations. Obviously, to welcome the cross-border rail link to Letterkenny. Obviously, we sort of disappointed that there isn't a further rail link on the eastern or the western coast seaboard. And, you know, highlight the fact that there are still gaps in terms of rail connectivity in terms of the report, which is a missed opportunity in some respects. Also, members were suggesting that we would suggest a halt at City of Derry Airport or Eglinton, as obviously it is a strategic site in the region, which accesses obviously our regional airport, has access to Foyle Port, and would also provide a future park and ride facility which would connect the communities of Eglinton, Maydown and Strathfoyle to the rail network. And also we have some recommendations there in the last bullet point in terms of Eglinton, you know, that site to be used for green hydrogen production in the future in terms of rail freight. So those are some just high level points that we were thinking about in terms of developing a response to Council for your consideration. The other discussion that we had at our last Governance and Strategic Planning Committee was in relation to another rail working group meeting. We've since noted that actually clashes now with the City of Culture anniversary and also the launch of the International Cities of Peace. So we're going to try and get another date for that. Obviously cognizance also that we're having a discussion today here as well around rail. So we'll try and get a date in October for that. So the recommendation in front of you today, members and Chair, is that you endorse and obviously take feedback on any of the points that we've outlined in section 3.6 in relation to our response to the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review recommendations. And just to note that a date for the next rail working group will be forthcoming. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rachel. So the first indicated speaker is Councillor Heaney. Conor.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. No, well, at the time, we obviously welcomed the publication of the rail review, and that still remains the case. But we do endorse the responses going back as corporate policy. I think there are areas that we need to flag up in terms of areas of concern and areas that we obviously welcome. That said, I suppose there's a couple of still areas of concern. Like, I know these things take time, but 2050 is a really long-term sort of project. The other area of concern is it's clear from the report that this still is not Irish government policy, and the fact we don't have an executive obviously means it can't be executive policy either. So for this to become a reality and for this to move from a lovely glossy document into something tangible, that's what needs to happen. So more work needs done, but happy to endorse the points made, and therefore I'll happily propose the item. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Mooney.
Thank you, Chair, and happy to welcome the report and second item. Really share a lot of the points that Councillor Heaney has made. Obviously, we endorse all the factors and the points made at 3.6, and as Rachel has outlined. And obviously, flag up the issue as well that there is that, as Concertini said, that this is not Irish government policy. This is still a review and it'll come from a consultation. I'm about the lack of executive here, and obviously it won't be in any form of policy here in this jurisdiction. But also, I'd like to counteract and go back, obviously, that really my reflection too was when this announcement was made about the review, how our council got stuck on it as such. Very early on, we saw it as an opportunity for us to realign about for issues of regional balance and equality that we face here. And the motion was brought very early on, and we got a real working group up. And that real working group was a really good working group. Everybody invested time in it, and I think it's. I know we didn't get all what we wanted from the review, but you see that stuff that the issues that we raised and the documents that our officers drafted and sent through on our basis, a lot of it is contained within that document. Not again, as I say, that a lot that there's still some missing, and 3.6 contains a lot of the stuff that we would like to see. But to me, it was a really good view of what the working group was and the achievements that we can get from it. But obviously, the key, one of the key factors is that the price tag on it is something like 30 billion, and we don't have an executive here, thanks to a party not going to government. Obviously, there's a bit heavy price tag, but even if we had an executive here, we could sit down and talk about these issues about the prices. But broadly, the SDLP and our group here in council welcomes the report, and we welcome further continuing report group reviews until this matter keeps carrying on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey.
Thank you. Sorry, my mic remained on there. Apologies. And thanks for the report. Very comprehensive. And like others, we welcome the strategic review which has been presented. I suppose the main element within some of the challenges was the demographics issue. I'm just looking at it now, and demographics in the end are not particularly conducive to supporting high-density, high-frequency railway networks in many places. But look at it the other way around. Because there isn't the infrastructure, that's where the demographics can be twisted. The old adage of build it and they'll come perhaps comes to mind. The issues of the gaps in the network and the issues of speed have been addressed by others. I'm going to challenge you on the 3.6 recommendation reference Portadown, Derry, Dublin. And it's not on Derry, Londonderry. And, as somebody who actually travelled regularly on the old line when it was there, it was called the Derry Road. So why not just use the historic name for that stretch of line that did exist? Thank you.
It's about a road, or it's about rail, not a road. So next indicated speaker is Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rachel, for the report, and very much welcome it, and I agree with a lot of the points that were made, and I also want to thank council officers for meeting with Into the West. I think Into the West, as we know, played a key role in making sure that the voice of Derry in the Northwest was influential in the review. And look, we have the worst. We're the least connected of all regions across the island. So we've been loudest in terms of taking this up. Rail connectivity isn't the same in Derry as it is in Dublin or as it is in Belfast in terms of how it concerns people. It very much concerns people here, and that's why it concerns our council as well. Obviously, I share the disappointment around the Sligo to Letterkenny to Derry line. I think we have to make the case about that gap. That means that the gap that exists in terms of an all Ireland rail network wouldn't exist, and I think we have to go back and make that point. Obviously, speed matters a lot, and also the time frame, and the time frame is worrying. So, I think we're all in agreement as a council that we're going to have to be noisy about this and pressure governments in both constituencies or both jurisdictions. We need more integration. We need more and more integration for rail and for everything else to make this island work for everybody. And I think there's going to be a role as well for the type of campaigning that led to this review in the first place, because it's going to take that to kind of push this forward. But thanks again for the report.
Thank you. And final indicated speaker is Alderman Kerrigan.
Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me in. I'm not a member of the committee, but I've just been viewing here. And in regards to the pack, as other members have already spoken in regards to the rail, that's a very detailed paper, and I do thank Rachel for bringing the report in. There are obviously major concerns, and it's not something that we ourselves as council can anyway touch the fund, but it's something that, again, it's good to see that we have continued to push that and continue to push. And again, we see the old railway lines that as we're down through Barnes Gap and Donegal, and would have been a very idyllic kind of route, and it's day. But again, welcome the report and thankful for it. But again, disappointed even with this connection here. We'll still have well, it's a neighbouring county for me and County Fermanagh there, still without a rail link. And again, there is the link. There is the link from the city down to Sligo through County Donegal. But again, a link from Sligo up onto Enniskillen and Ontoma again is a missed opportunity as well that was in place in the old network. But no, welcome report, and thanks very much, Chair, for allowing me in.
Thank you, Alderman Kerrigan. So that is that item proposed by Councillor Heaney, seconded by Councillor Mooney. No dissent, so the recommendation is approved. Item 9 is the corporate improvement plan. We've got Ellen to take you through that.
Yes, and thank you, Chair. The purpose of the report in front of members this afternoon is to provide you with details of the feedback received as a result of the consultation process on Council's improvement objectives for 23-24, and to seek your comments and approval for the updated corporate plan and improvement plan for 23-24. As indicated in the paper, Council has an obligation under the Local Government Act 2014 to publish a performance improvement plan, and normally that is no later than the end of June each year. As you can see in terms of Appendix 3 to this report, we actually received correspondence indicating that because of the elections, that date was changed to the end of September. And also, as I say, just by way of background, to highlight that at a previous meeting of this particular committee, members endorsed the commencement of that public consultation exercise in relation to 4 improvement objectives as set out in the report. In terms of key issues, the document Appendix 1 is set out in 4 sections. Section 1 looks at context, Section 2 looks at the corporate plan, 3 looks at the performance improvement plan specifically, and 4 relates to members' contact details. And again, as I say, highlighting that we annually have to produce this document, and in devising our improvement objectives, we look at what we've done the previous year, any comments that we've had, obviously the inclusive growth plan, progress in learning, and indeed our stakeholder views. And in the context of this particular year, the strategic priorities, including the financial challenges facing the council. So that accordingly, for the 23-24 year, we set out 1 updated improvement objective, 2 unchanged objectives, and 1 new improvement objective. The consultation itself ran from the 5th of April to the 4th of August. And indeed, as I say, the outworkings of that process are set out in Appendix 2, details of which have also been sent to the directors for their consideration in terms of, as I say, stakeholder or user feedback in terms of their experiences and views on our services. In overall terms, in terms of that online process, there was approximately 84 to 92% agreement with the individual objectives, and therefore there's no specific changes proposed in terms of of the draft ones that were initially presented to members of this committee. And the other point, sorry, members, I would highlight it at 3.7, the very last sentence on that page, 156, there is a typo. The 22-23 should be 23-24. The recommendation in front of members today is basically that subject to your views, the document entitled Corporate Plan 23-24 and Improvement Plan 23-24 at Appendix 1 is approved. Thank you, members.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Ellen for that extensive report. And I viewed it last night, both the contents. I have no real comments, but happy to propose it, subject to other members' comments. Thank you.
Another seconder? Mr. Jackson?
Well, Chair, I'm happy to second the report on behalf of Sinn Féin. Just welcome it, and particular welcome all those that took the time to respond to the consultation. And there was some interesting consultation responses, and there were some fantastic ideas that was contained within there. But in terms of the overall objective, I think we're all in agreement that that's the focus of our council, and that's what we and particular the first objective. No, it dominated a lot of the business and the meetings of council in the lead up to the rates process, and quite a lot of work went into that, and that work's still ongoing. So it's an ongoing piece of work, and some of the consultation responses in terms of the feed-in from ratepayers is an important element of that if we're moving forward. They try and to ensure that this council meets the needs of ratepayers and constituents, then that consultation process is important. But in relation to the report, it's a very detailed report, and I want to thank officers for bringing it to us today. Thank you.
So that item is proposed by Councillor Mooney, seconded by Councillor Jackson. So that's approved. Item 10 is the annual performance report, and we've got Ellen to take us through that item.
Again, through you, Chair, the previous item related to the plan for 23-24, and this item relates to the annual performance report for 22-23. Again, members are invited to provide any comments and also to consider and approve the document at Appendix 1. Again, in terms of the legislation, we're required to produce an annual performance report by the 30th of September. Following the end of each financial year. And again, at 2.4 of the report, it sets out key issues that should need to be addressed in that report in terms of discharging our general duty to secure continuous improvement, achievement of our outcomes from our previous year's improvement objectives, results of our statutory indicators, and also any self-imposed performance standards and indicators that we produced for that particular year. The key issues, as I say, in terms of the document at Appendix 1, is we've set out our improvement objectives, our financial performance, what we achieved in terms of our corporate plan objectives, also any performance improvement areas and criteria, and how our objectives relate to those, and also our performance in terms of our statutory indicators. In overall terms, I think the conclusion is that there is evidence of improvement in terms of the 22-23 year, and the document itself contains numerous examples of initiatives undertaken. I should say as well that all of this, both the plan and the performance report, will be subject to audit by the Northern Ireland Audit Office, and we expect that to start shortly. And as I say, whenever, if again subject to members' approval, we will try to make this more accessible by providing a summary version on our website as well. So the recommendation in front of members today is subject to your comments to approve for publication the draft performance report, which is set out in Appendix 1. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. Any comments? Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, Cormac Chair, and thanks to Ellen for the report. And I suppose reading this report, one of the things that jumps out at you is the amount of work that was carried out by council. And I know it's very like we're involved in committee meetings and working groups all year round, but when you see it all collated and together, it just jumps at you at the scale of work carried out by every directorate within council, and it's huge, and it does make a tremendous difference to the people that live in this part of the world. Part of me feels that an appendix on a committee meeting doesn't do it justice. The content of this report almost deserves a standalone session on its own. But I can understand the time pressures in relation to where we're at. But there's been a huge amount of work that's been carried out by council under very difficult circumstances, and I think everybody involved in that needs to be applauded and commended. I want to particularly welcome the work that was carried out in relation to the delivery of the waterside shared village. And that's something that I see every day. And you see that initiative has brought people together. It's delivered facilities. Through the investment on the community centres and the like. So, and that's contained within this report. We see we're seeing firsthand the outcome of the hard work carried out mainly by council officers, and it can't be lost on us whenever a report has whenever it's a report like this is come across our desks and to be ratified, because it's much more than a line on a page. It's transformed communities, transformed people's lives, and encouraged people to get out and get active. So, and there's many examples, and we could be here all day going through the benefits that a lot of these programs and activities have brought to people. So we endorse it and commend all officers and members for their role in getting some of these delivered. Thank you.
Councillor Mooney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Ellen, and thank you to the team for producing this document. You can see, as been already, that there's what our council does on an annual basis. And one point here is like I can just see it for note. And for example, 4,646 environmental health service requests that were investigated over the last year, and amongst this all our examples that's contained that document. So I had something in my mind, but then I had another thought, and the only thought was that if anybody ever asked me now as a councillor, what does our council do for you? I'm going to refer to that document and say, look at that document, because that's what it does, So on that note, happy to second, Chair.
Good point, Councillor Mooney. So that's proposed and seconded, no dissent, so that item's approved. So the next one is item 11, period poverty consultation, and we've got Ellen again.
Yes, again, through you, Chair, it's purpose of this report is to seek members' comments and approval for the draft response that is contained in Appendix 1. And basically, as I say, by way of context, just to remind members that in 2018, members resolved at this council that we would support the On the Ball campaign, and in doing so, we've strived to become the first council in the North to proactively help tackle period poverty and be part of bringing about a positive change. And again, as I say, this particular initiative was widely recognised as the first such initiative by a council in Northern Ireland. Subsequent to that, there was again a motion in 2019 relating, in 2019 the implementation began, and really we went forward in terms of 3 leisure centres, the Ryan McBride Brandywell Stadium, and also the Guildhall, and that pilot was launched. Now, currently, as I say, the pilot itself has been extended and the arrangements are currently ongoing to provide free period products in those designated facilities. Subsequent to that then, and more recently, we have the Period Products Free Provision Act, which was passed in 2022. And from that act, the act says that free period products are to be made available in Northern Ireland from May 24. And specifically, the Executive Office aims to ensure that period products are obtainable free of charge by all persons who need to use them while in Northern Ireland, and then are currently seeking views on the ways in which people ought to be able to obtain period products, the locations in which those products would be available, and also the type of products that would be available. So that consultation has been running from June and concludes on the 18th of September. And as I say, just as again, by way of background, just to note that Council also had a motion relating to period poverty and the linkage to sustainable and single-use products, which is an ongoing piece of work. So in terms of the documentation in front of members for consideration, a response to the consultation has been set out in Appendix 1 for consideration and comment. I would note that the closing date is the 18th of September. So again, with members' indulgence, that rather than miss that date prior to it going to Council, that if you're happy and have any feedback, we can certainly make sure it's submitted. In addition to responding to the consultation questions, which, as I say, are really about ways, locations and types of period products, it's suggested that there are a number of comments added, and that those are set out at 3.2, basically saying that we welcome the consultation and the Executive Office's recognition that period inequality contributes to poor mental health and wellbeing experience of those who are unable to access basic health essentials. And this is a growing issue in light of the cost of living crisis. We note that we had passed a motion in 2018 supporting the On the Ball, and we've had an initiative in place since 2019. And also highlights the fact that given the significant financial and resource challenges facing local government, the Council would expect that any additional burdens on financial or other resources associated with the implementation of the legislation would be mitigated by the Executive Office. That comment's in because, as I say, obviously under the legislation, the Executive Office would see a key role for Council in terms of making sure and coordinating activities in terms of not only our own facilities, but I think it's a wee bit unclear in terms of the wider public sector. In terms of the recommendation, and again, as I say, I know that subject is close to some members' hearts, but subject to members' comments, the draft response at Appendix 1 is approved and again forwarded to the Executive Office before the consultation closing date. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Ellen. So I've got one indicated speaker currently, so that's Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ellen, for that report. And I would just like to begin by saying I'm happy to propose it. I think it is a really comprehensive consultation response. I think it does address many of the issues in terms of the barriers, the types of products, the impact that period poverty has. So in terms of the consultation response, I'm delighted to say that it's all there, and I'm more than happy for that to be submitted as soon as we can, because I do think that as a council that led the way, I don't think that we should miss the opportunity in getting our response into the consultation. So more than happy, Alan, to propose. So thank you for the work.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Ellen for the report. Reading the consultation document, I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Duffy. I think that this council could teach other councils and other organisations a thing or two, particularly around this particular issue. And I definitely think it's something that we should get on early, because as Sandra has pointed out, we've led the way in this. And I think what we have done has seemed to work, and has seemed to go down well with the wider public. So I think it's something that we should be pointing out. We've had a number of reports which points out, and others have touched on it, the good work that council have done. This is another example, in my opinion, and it is definitely something that we should be showing others how it's done and how to make this work. Thank you.
Thank you. And final indicated speaker is Alderman Cook.
Thanks for letting me on, Chair, and I'd be happy to second the proposal. Thanks to Ellen for letting us hear the proposal. And I do think it's great, just what the other speakers have said as well. As us as a council have led the way, I don't think we should be dropping the ball. So hopefully we just continue to do the good work. And as I say, I'd be happy to second the proposal.
And Councillor Hargan.
Thank you, Councillor Farrell, for letting me in, and we're happy to support the proposal as well. And thank you, Ellen, for the report. And I think our council has led the way, because we listened to women, we listened to women's organisations, we listened to girls, we listened to trade unions that have been campaigning and demanding this. And that's where most good proposals come from. They don't tend to come from the council. They tend to come from campaigning organisations that are trying to move these forward. And I think this is something that needs to be progressed as soon as possible. And our council should be an advocate and make sure we do whatever we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. So that was posed by Councillor Duffy, seconded by Councillor Tierney. No dissent, so that's approved. Next item is item 12, which is the nomination to NULGA Strategic Policy Network. And again, no surprises, we've got Ellen to take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is to draw members' attention to a wee bit of an anomaly that has arisen. And really the purpose of the report is to nominate member representation onto the NULGA Strategic Policy Network, and also to note, and this is where the anomaly arises, that the representation is no longer required on 4 NULGA policy and learning networks. As indicated in the report, we had our special council meeting in order to identify all the nominations to external bodies and internal bodies on the 20th of June. And subsequent to that meeting, the NULGA working groups, or the NULGA policy networks, councillors Devine, Tierney, Jackson and Duffy were nominated to serve on, as I say, the networks identified there. Now, NULGA have subsequently advised that following a review of their policy networks and at a meeting on their executive on the 23rd of June, they agreed that a new policy oversight group would be developed to enable members to decide on ongoing priorities, and that the 4 of the 5 policy networks would be discontinued. So the only one that's going forward is the elected member development one, which Councillor Devine was nominated to. Now, so consequently, the key issues really are that 4 members were previously elected to 4 separate policy networks for the electoral term, and that's set out in 2.1. And as I say, those positions now are no longer, in situ. And in order, and this is again a suggestion for members' consideration, that because we have 4 members displaced, that there is the option to take up an annual position on the newly formed strategic policy networks, i.e. 1 member per year on each of these mandates. Now, I would say as well, in terms of the order of appointments, at the special meeting, Councillor Jackson was nominated at position 105, Councillor Duffy at 106, Councillor Taylor at 108, and Councillor Jackson at 141. So that may give again an indication of what years this can be attributed to if members are so minded. So again, the recommendation in front of members' consideration today is to nominate one of the members, one of the members below onto the newly formed NILGA Strategic Policy Network for each of the years of the election mandate, and obviously to cease the membership of the networks identified by NILGA. I suppose what's not in the report, the other alternative is probably to go back to the DeHunt and move down that table again. But I am conscious that members have been displaced by this change in process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. First indicated speakers, Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ellen. I'm very tempted to say I shall not be moved, but I'm not that precious. The groups aren't there. I also want to declare an interest because I'm the SDLP office bearer on NILGA, and due to that, I'm on the executive of NILGA as well. Look, I'm quite happy. I think, 3rd in terms of the list rolled out. I'm quite happy to do year 3, and if that's what the others are happy to do, or see what way others are, but I'm not that precious on it. Thank you.
You've changed your tune. Councillor Jackson.
I was, like Councillor Tierney, I was going to come in and suggest we have another special council meeting and rub the hand again. But I suppose it's unfortunate, but I suppose what Ellen's outlined is a logical solution, and we've no issue with it. Whatever year, if that's the fairest way that the years are allocated based on the first shouts, then through the hunt, then it's a fair way, and we have no opposition to that proposal. So, yep. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
And Alderman Hussey.
Thank you. I'm not involved in this bun fight, so I suppose the only downside to that is the issue of continuity, which is something that both NILGA and NAC have been seeking. So it's that issue of continuity through it. But I do notice that new policy structures will be populated at a later date. Does that present then opportunities? How will that be dealt with?
Through you, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't have an insight to those, but as soon as we become available, we'll bring them to members for consideration. And as you say, if there's any opportunities, then certainly, as I say, we won't be slow in taking advantage of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so that's proposed by Councillor Tierney, seconded by Councillor Jackson. No dissent. So we've been here 2 hours and 21 minutes. I'm going to propose a brief comfort break, and we resume at 6:30. And hopefully we can get it wrapped up very quickly after that. That's 6:30. So we'll reconvene this meeting. Item 13 is the NULGA Leadership and Local Planning Leadership Programme for elected members 23-24. And again, we've got Ellen to take us through that paper.
Thank you, Chair. And the purpose of this report is to consider elect member participation on the NULGA Leadership Programme and also on their Local Planning Leadership Programme 23-24. And again, if participation is agreed, to approve the payment of associated costs. As indicated in terms of the background of the paper, Council has participated on these leadership programmes in the past, and indeed the details of each of the years are provided at paragraph 2.3. Within each of the programmes, there is an option to achieve accreditation as well as doing the course, and details obviously of the programmes are given in Appendix 1 and 2. The programmes are being offered by NULGA in years 1, 2 and 3 of the mandate, so members have the opportunity to participate, if not this year, obviously in subsequent years. And again, following the member for personal development plan process, a number of members indicated their interest in participating in the cohorts, as again set out in the report. Key features of the programmes are identified within the item, and as I say, also the modular delivery mechanism which is proposed. The leadership programme itself runs from October to May, and the local planning leadership programme runs from October to February. There's a two-tier cost system again associated whether or not there's accreditation or not, and obviously the issue was the accreditation option certainly involves more work. The accreditation itself does enhance members' competitiveness when applying for employment positions because it's obviously accredited. And again, I suppose key to all of this is that members need to consider the amount of commitment required to attend the programmes, and indeed the feedback has been in the past fairly positive. However, it's fair to say that direct feedback from participants is that members underestimated the time commitment required, particularly in terms of the accredited options. So in terms of the costs, they're identified at paragraph 4.2. They may increase if they don't get a full cohort, in which case the participants in the programme may be asked to sort of carry a heavier load in terms of the apportionment. The recommendation in front of members is subject again to your comments that elected member participation onto the NULGA Leadership Programme and the Local Planning Leadership Programme for 23-24 is that you approve participation up to a maximum of 3 members in each of those programmes, and that those costs can be met within the elected member development budget if members are so minded. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ellen. Councillor Jackson.
Opposed, Chair.
You. Alderman Hussey. Seconded. Would you like to speak, Councillor Mooney? No. Councillor Tierney.
Declaration of interest.
Well,
I sit in the executive board of NULGA.
Chair, I sit in the executive board as well, so I'm not entirely sure there's a requirement for a declaration of interest, but if in the interest of clarity, I'd highlight that I sit in the executive board, nominated by council.
Well, both declarations are noted. So that's proposed and seconded. Councillor Tierney, do you wish to make another comment?
I understand Councillor Jackson's point, but my declaration of interest is slightly different. He's saying that he's a nomination from council, which wouldn't require him to make a declaration of interest, as I understand it. My nomination is from political party, which is slightly different because it's an outside organisation.
Well, both are noted, which is fine. and appropriate. So that recommendation has been approved. Next item is item 14, Local Democracy Week. And Ellen?
Through you, Chair. Purpose of this report is to inform members and seek approval for the proposed programme of events to promote Local Democracy Week 23 and to obviously encourage participation of all members if possible. Again, as I say, members will be fairly familiar with this. In the past, we've hosted a number of events during Local Democracy Week, targeting primary and secondary schools. And the event aims to raise young people's awareness of how council operates, and also tells them about the opportunities for taking part in local decision making, and as a result, how can they themselves in future encourage their involvement in local affairs and upholding local democracy. The initiatives are outlined in terms of the proposed programme set out the appendices, and clearly the objective of all of this initiative is to encourage young people to voice their opinions on issues that matter to them, raise the profile of local democracy, the role of the mayor and elected members, and encourage more councillors to get involved in youth participation and to support the young people of the area. And obviously, as I say, the local democracy is also a key commitment within the council's member learning and development programme. The recommendation in front of members today is, as I say, again, subject to your views, that you approve the draft programme set out in the Appendix 1, that the costs are incurred or allocated to the members' training and development budget, and all members, where practical, get involved in promoting and participating in local democracy. Thank you, members.
Thanks, Ellen. I have three indicated speakers so far. So Councillor Duffy, Alderman Hussey, Councillor Donnelly, and then Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Ellen, for the report. I am just more than happy to propose it. One of the highlights last year during my year as Mayor was Local Democracy Week, and not just the week of activities that went on, but the continuous engagement that we did have with local school children, be it from a primary level right up to A-level students. And it was so worthwhile because they had a huge desire to learn about council, to know what was going on, to know what the role of a councillor was, what the role of the mayor was, even to get into this building, to get a look around it. Same in the Strabane Council offices. It did my heart good to see that engagement with young people, and I think that it's so worthwhile to ensure that our younger citizens are engaged in that and see the work that goes on within council and the role that they can have within that growing up and the influence that they can have. So I think they're really worthwhile activities, and more than happy to propose.
Thank you, Chair, and can I endorse the comments from Councillor Duffy. It's a truly enjoyable and challenging event to take part in. I'm happy to second, but I do have reservations, and Ellen will know exactly what I'm going to say. I'm looking at the programme, and the three major ones are all in the Guildhall. I know there are limitations in the Council Chamber in Strabane, but there's the Alley Theatre. I rest my case on that. I do welcome the fourth element, which is the opportunity to actually go into the schools, and I would urge that council are extremely and high profile, active, proactive in approaching schools that elected representatives from across the city and district can find their way into the local schools. And as Councillor Duffy has already said, just engage with the young people and let them know, that we are there to serve our community, and serving that community includes those young people that you will be engaging with. It is, I said at the beginning, it's enjoyable, it's challenging. Believe you me, it's challenging, but something we all should be doing. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly.
Chair, just on page 475, it's just a wee bit of terminology where it says leaders of local parties will have the opportunity to share how their party has supported blah blah. I think that should be also to include and independence. Chair, I like the previous speakers look forward to this, and it is enjoyable. And have taken part in it since I became a councillor. There's something that you know, regarding schools, Chair, there is other groups of young people who may be described as hard to reach and that. And looking back at myself as a young person, I don't think any teacher would have took me down to meet councillors or whatever, you know what I mean? But I think that outside the school structures too, there's community, there's a lot of people doing sterling work within the community and voluntary sector, and they're dealing with young people who may not be, you know, showing their best potential. And I think that if there's some way that it could be broadened out, that if we could use some, not they build on going forward, that if we could use some of the community workers and that in order to get some of those children to take part either in a separate event or another event, because I think we may be, not deliberately, but some children may be excluded from that process, or maybe excluding themselves because, you know, their nature within school. I would like to get those children involved too in the conversation and bring them in and have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. Ellen, do you want to comment on that? Is that doable?
Chair, I mean, I certainly appreciate all members' comments, and I mean, as evidenced by your comments, this is generally a fairly positive experience and challenging as well. And there's not an event you don't come away with either a smile or you've learned something. And in ways, it really is an important role because you're catching people at their formative year. Their years and they're getting to engage with local politics and all of that. Now, in terms of the comments, in terms of inclusivity, we'll look again in terms of the hard to reach groups, because as you said that, I'm sort of thinking, you know, there are disadvantaged children in terms of disabilities and stuff like that. We might add maybe a wee focus or a targeted campaign over a phased number of years. But certainly, as I say, whilst it's time out of members' diaries, I think everybody generally is glad they've attended. And again, pardon the old adage, you know, like children are the future, you know, so we really want them to engage with us as decision makers and getting their voices heard. So in terms of, as I say, the inclusivity, and again, I've noted Alderman Hussey's remarks about the, you know, the venues and stuff like that. We'll take another look at it, and if we have any additional proposals, we'll bring them back to members. Thank you.
Yeah, so Councillor Tierney, Councillor Duffy, and then Councillor Hargan. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Ellen for the report. Like Councillor Donnelly and probably others, I've taken part in Local Democracy Week every year since I became a councillor. And there's not many opportunities in this role where you have a bit of fun, and Local Democracy Week is definitely one of them. You never know what question you're going to be asked, but it's always something that I've enjoyed, and we'll be encouraging our councillors to row on and to get involved. I think Councillor Donnelly's point around, and it's not a phrase that I like to use, but the harder to reach young people, or young people who aren't fully engaged in the school structures, getting involved will be something that I think will be really interesting as well. And I think it's something that we should definitely be looking at. So we're happy to support the programme. And I know you're talking about children who may be disabled or something, more making the programme more inclusive in the coming years. But if there's anything that could be done this year to enhance that's already very attractive looking programme, we will be definitely supportive of it. Thank you.
Councillor Duffy?
Yeah, I just wanted to make comment on what Councillor Donnelly was saying around hard to reach young people. And one of the things that I did last year as mayor was make sure that I went out or made contact with a lot of the youth clubs in there, a lot of the youth leaders, a lot of the community. I had a lot of young people who had come through the Guildhall, or I had gone out to visit them, that wouldn't have normally have engaged in those type of conversations. I had young people who were engaged at times in antisocial behaviour within their communities, but were then engaging with the youth service. I had young people who were engaged in bonfire building. I had different types of young people come through the Guildhall come in here, and they really got a lot out of the experience. I have had feedback as well from the youth service that was something that they really enjoyed doing. Now that was all done through sort of mayor's initiatives, but maybe that is something that could be formalised in the future as something that could be done, because it absolutely was so worthwhile. And the young people that came through, what they got out of it was they enjoyed the experience. They enjoyed, particularly, I'm going to just talk about this building in particular, they enjoyed coming in here and seeing nooks and crannies of in here that they wouldn't normally see. It wouldn't be open to the general public. So there's wee bits and pieces that you can do to engage people, and they see then their role within it all. So maybe just try and formalise some of that.
And Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Ellen, for the report, and definitely support this. I think it's one of the Council's best initiatives. I think, trying to engage young people is very, very important. And like Councillor Donnelly, I probably wouldn't have been interested in it when I would have been 16 or 17. But I would have benefited from it. So I've got, I suppose, even just thinking about specifically about the schools, how do you get selected to go to the Guildhall? Right? Is there a selection process that the schools run? Because if you're not that interested, you're probably not going. And there's all sorts of reasons why some children are maybe more interested in politics. Like if your parents are political activists or councillors and you know something about it, you end up then emulating that. And that's how issues of class and all work as well. I think some of the best events are when we go out to the schools, and that's when you can speak then to the whole class, because it's kind of mandatory. Which means that even if you're not getting selected to come along to this event and the whole class, and then you learn something from it, even if you'd have been reluctant to go. And, you might not speak at the meeting because you don't have the confidence to ask the question, but the process of participating actually is what gives people the opportunity to learn something about it. So I know there's an option in there for events in the schools, and I've thought, I thought we could have done more events, and obviously it's councillors' time, it's officers have to try and chase it up, but I would like to see more events in the classes if we can do that. And I think what people have said about youth groups and everything else is very important too.
So, yep. That's proposed by Councillor Duffy, seconded by Alderman Hussey. No dissent. That's agreed. And I would agree with the comments from everybody about the importance of actually going into the schools. And I remember one particular memory from last year where it was myself and Councillor Tierney and Mayor Duffy at the time where we went to St. Teresa's Primary School in Gala, and we were quizzed and questioned by an assembly hall just full of children. We were grilled. We probably got a bigger grilling than you would get from Mark Rullers or Stephen Nolan, but it was a really, really enjoyable experience, and we should be doing more of that. Trying to do it. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Councillor Mooney.
Can I just say, Chair, to you, I attended a Waterside Primary School. Was my first one with Mayor Duffy. She was in, and was myself and just Sandra in Everton Primary School. And again, it was a grilling. I got very nervous to start, very anxious, which is not unlike me at times, so.
That's definitely worthwhile. Very, very worthwhile. So, folks, that's open for decision completed. We've got a number of items and open for information. Right, so Councillor Jackson, yeah.
I'm not too sure what way you're going to do this. I'd like to come on item 19.
Well, you just nominate the one you want to.
No, well, item 19 is the members' update following the meeting with the apprentice boys, and it was some time ago, and quite a lot has happened since then. But the meeting itself, in my view, was worthwhile. And if we're going to challenge issues around parading and make parading better in our city and district, then that dialogue is important. Chair, we've just come out of the summer recess, and during the summer recess, there was another Apprentice Boys parade, which there was there was a number of incidents that's caused widespread anger within our community, at least on the waterside, and it's something that we had hoped was going to be a thing of the past, but if there are people coming to our city intent to cause hurt, intent to cause offence, it needs to be addressed, and it's only going to be addressed through dialogue. So I'm disgusted at what happened on the 12th of August this year in our city, and I've no doubt that many people within the Apprentice Boys would feel equally disgusted. And it needs to be addressed. So I'm going to propose that we write to the Apprentice Boys and arrange a follow-up meeting, because we can't leave this. There's numerous parades towards the end of the year, and we can't leave it the parades season next year. So I suggest that we write the Apprentice Boys and all our loyal orders and get them involved in the discussions. They discuss the concerns that many of us have and look at ways to ensure that the incidents that happened on the 12th of August this year are not repeated in our streets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I'm going to be a pedant and say, could you write that down? Or send it to Paul, just to be sure what we're voting on here, because there mightn't be complete agreement. In the meantime,
of interest as a member of the Apprentice Boys.
Noted, Alderman Hussey. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. I also attended the meeting, which took place quite some time ago now. It took quite some time to get that meeting actually set up as well. I thought it was a very useful meeting. But over the years, I've attended meetings with the Apprentice Boys in various different capacities, always after a march, whether it be with Bloody Sunday families, with our own political party, or with the council in this particular one. And they're all reacting to something that has happened at a particular march, may it be Soldier F banners or the symbol on the sleeves of a particular band, or as Councillor Jackson is suggesting, what happened in the 12th of August this year. And at each and every one of those meetings, I have been very clear with the Apprentice Boys that what, in my view, they need to do is engage with the local community. And I don't believe that they are. They think that they are, but I don't believe that they are. And we can't allow these parades to go on year after year after year. Come in here, September after September, call for a meeting, and just ignore it until the next time something happens. I genuinely believe that the organisers of the Apprentice Boys parades want to show off the city in the best possible light. I genuinely do. I genuinely believe that the organisers of these parades are as fed up as what we are at having to attend these meetings about incidents that happen at the parades. And I genuinely believe that they would welcome any support that we can offer or any engagement that we can offer in the lead up to these events, as opposed to in the aftermath. So I think this proposal is quite a good one, and I'm more than happy to second it. I would like to see these engagements continue because, you know, it is a large event. It is. I have no idea how many people the Apprentice Boys bring to the town every time that they parade, but it's a significant number. And the incidents that we're seeing happen year after year, they need to get a hold on. I don't know if they've got the capacity within their organisation to get a hold on it because of the numbers of people that they're bringing. And if they can't, then they need support to do that. And I think engagement with stakeholders, genuine engagement with stakeholders across the city will help, and hopefully will help try and improve what we see at the parade. We had people out and about on that particular day, and some of the reports that we have got, which of events which happened in and around the waterside in the city centre, can't be allowed to continue. They just can't. And I say that from a genuine position of, I don't think that apprentice boys want to see that continue, because it's only creating havoc for them, and it's only running down what they see as a positive symbol of their culture. And that's not, I would imagine, not where they want to be. So I think this is a good proposal. I think it's something that we, not only should we have a follow-up meeting, but we should be looking at continuous engagement with such a large organisation like the Apprentice Boys whenever they're bringing large numbers to the city, so that we can mitigate against the offensive incidents which are happening whenever bands are coming in from outside and they don't care about what happens. They don't care, in my view, about the reputation of this city. They don't care about the reputation of the Apprentice Boys. They're here mainly for a day out, and they come, do what they want to do, and then they head off again. There'll be none of those that were involved in the incidents will be at this meeting, I wouldn't imagine. There'll be none of those involved in those incidents will be listening to this debate. They'll just be looking to see when's the next day out. And they help and support the Apprentice Boys and their genuine members. I think we need to be looking at continuous engagement at these large-scale events which are happening across this district. So we're more than happy to support the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Tierney. I've got two more indicated speakers. The first is Alderman Cook, Chelsea, and then following that will be Councillor Donnelly.
Thanks for letting me in, Chair. I just want to say on behalf of the DP, we welcome the interaction between the Apprentice Boys and the Council, and I want to thank those involved in the previous engagements and any to follow. And I would also like to commend the Apprentice Boys for their proactive attitude, as well as the positive engagement that they continue to have in order to run these successful community events, and recognise the great deal of effort and time and hard work that goes into the organising of these events throughout the year. So I just want to thank those involved, and obviously due to the proposal, any future ones. Thanks again.
Councillor Donnelly.
Good Chair. Look, I was at the meeting and I found it very interesting. There was a lot of things said at the meeting that doesn't appear on the minutes. I'm glad Councillor Jackson put it down in writing, because there was people who turned up at the meeting who, in my personal opinion, shouldn't have been at the meeting, and one of them actually left. If it's a meeting between council officers and councillors and aldermen and the law and order. I think that needs to be clear, because if there's people who don't want to engage with other people, they should be at least given that right. There was also the issue of who, as Councillor Tierney has mentioned, who the Apprentice Boys are engaging with, i.e. BRG. There's all sorts of different opinions in that, who a lot of people, who are they and who do represent. And some of the comments, as I say, in the meeting, which I think were interesting to say the least, that particularly from the unionist community, where they said that going to the police as a first port of call isn't always, helpful. And they also questioned the issue of condemnation. And I have to say, it's not often that I find myself agreeing with unionism, but in that particular meeting, I have to say that both those comments were in line with my own thinking, and nobody at the meeting disagreed with that. So for them issues alone, and the chance to engage in dialogue and put diverse opinions, then I think the meeting was interesting and worthwhile happening. And if a similar meeting was set up again, then I would have no issue whatsoever of being at that meeting and engaging. Thank you.
Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful that I have declared an interest I took part in the parade. I was actually in my band along with my club. And I'm actually surprised to hear what had been said, because en route, as we went round, I wasn't aware of anything. You're in the middle of it. You're not aware of what's going on. And I'm sure, probably 95, 96% of those on parade are not aware of issues that took place. I don't buy the city papers, so I presume there was stuff in the local papers here. I don't buy them, so I don't know what has been talked about, but I am certain, as Councillor Cook, or Alderman Cook has already alluded to, that the organisers are aware of issues that have arisen. I am certain that the General Committee of the Apprentice Boys will be looking very closely at issues that are being alluded to here in this chamber. And I'm sure that the organisation will be keen to address those issues, if they are issues that are addressable by the organisation. As has been pointed out, a considerable number of people do come to the city. Not all of those are members of the Apprentice Boys, and therein lies perhaps an issue with regard to how do you control people who are not within your organisation, and that is something I'm sure the association will look at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Hussey. So I don't think there's any dissent there. I don't think anybody voiced that agreement with the proposal, so I take it that is agreed. Are there any remaining issues that people would want to raise and open for information? Councillor Harkin?
Yeah, and this includes the correspondence, Councillor Farrell. Yeah. So look, just in terms of the Appendix 1 and Appendix 4, 2 letters from the Department for Communities, both very disappointing. One in response to our request to double the amount of funding for the hardship fund, and the second in response to our call to protect the rate support grant and the uplifted based on inflation. It just reads to me that the Permanent Secretary is shrugging his shoulders and saying there's nothing we can do. And there's two things. If they didn't push through those cuts, they would create a crisis for the British government who are actually implementing them. And that's what I think they should do. And my guess is that the Permanent Secretary and people like him who are making these decisions are not being affected the way that we know that people right across our all communities here are being impacted. So disappointing. We're not surprised that that's the response, but there is an alternative. There is stuff that could be done instead of shrugging your shoulders.
Okay, so I think that is open business concluded, finally. So can I have a proposer to move on to confidential? Councillor Mooney and Councillor Tierney.